Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Casual Criminalist. Yes, we're back, and as ever, one of my writers, thank you Emma, has put me together a script, Oscar Pistorius. This is the dude who's like the Paralympics? Paralympics? How do you say that? It doesn't matter. It's a very small part of today. Well, maybe it's a big part of today's story because this guy, he's an athlete, but isn't he in prison for murder, allegedly? I can't remember how this ended up. I'm pretty sure he's in jail, but it might be for manslaughter or something. So let's just sprinkle in those allegedlys until we know for sure. Emma's about to tell me, if you're new here, the format of the show is I've never read this before. Emma's prepared it for me, and you and I, dear audience, are going to explore it together. Let's jump in.
What about Jennifer? We're not just going to leave her here.
There are a number of things that people immediately associate with South Africa. Let me see. That big park, Kruger National, that's in South Africa, right? Kruger National Park, Victoria Falls, my grandma. That's what I associate. My grandma, she died last month, sadly. But she was in Johannesburg. Oh, wine, of course. I just saw that on the next line. Our wildlife, the scenic beauty of our diverse landscapes, our weather, our wines, Cape Town, and the iconic Table Mountain. And of course, the fact that Simon's grandmother lives or used to live in Johannesburg. There we go.
This is awkward.
Yeah, it's good. Like, South Africa's come up so many times, and I've definitely gone on a tangent about this before, so there you go. But used to live, like, literally as of last month. She was really old. She was like in her mid-90s. She was not all there. So it was time. But it's still sad. I didn't know her very well, though. But South Africa is also known for its darker side, with the term apartheid. Oh, yeah, of course. That's true. Being one of the first things that many people associate with Nelson Mandela's Rainbow Nation. The second, unfortunately, is our staggering crime rate, which goes hand in hand with the extreme levels of poverty that affect many areas of our country. Yeah, I went to South Africa a couple of years ago. Jesus, no. It's more like, it's like 5 years ago, something like that. And I liked it. Like, it's a beautiful country. Fantastic food, fantastic wine. But there is a bit of a crime vibe, isn't there? Even in somewhere like, I've not been to Johannesburg, but I hear that's different from Cape Town. And even Cape Town's like, everyone's got an electric fence, everyone's got razor wire, everyone's like super crime aware. And it's just like, that makes it, I would like to go back. But it's, my wife's also less keen. She's like, it was really nice, but I was a bit scared. Is that okay? And I don't think we'd want to go back with the kids like anytime soon. Anyway, moving on.
Thanks for sharing your holiday plans, Simon.
Wait, there's more.
Where am I going this year? Oh, I'm going to France, going to the south of France. That'll be nice. So far. Probably do a second holiday as well later in the year. That'll be nice. Nice and safe, south of France, Provence. According to an article posted on Business Tech on the 3rd of February 2023, our crime statistics on violent homicides have resulted in South Africa being ranked as the 6th most dangerous country in the world. No
South Africa has one of the highest violent crime rates in the world.
At least 5 people were killed, including 2 South Africans.
A gang of gunmen attacked the cast.
I'm worried. I'm scared. I know how to protect myself.
Oh my God. With the other top countries being El Salvador, Venezuela, Colombia, and Guatemala. Surprised Guatemala's up there. I've been to Guatemala. It's, thought it was quite nice, to be honest. It felt a bit like, what's the politically appropriate term? Like, when you're trying to think of the politically appropriate word for poor.
Latino.
So I've just done the non-politically appropriate thing. You know what I mean. It's like, it was a bit run down. There was a lot of holes in the road and stuff. But El Salvador's riddled with gangs. Venezuela is, well,
We're doomed.
the government's kind of destroying the country. Colombia is Colombia. It's a lot better than it was. What's up with Guatemala? I'm sure there's something terrible going on there. I was there maybe 12 years ago. 11 years ago, something like that. South Africa also ranks higher than Iraq and Somalia when it comes to how likely you are to get randomly attacked on the street. And again, holy shit. Considering that they're both active war zones, I have some questions regarding the validity of the article's statistics. Anyway, we don't have that many notable crime cases in South Africa. Off the top of my head, I can recall only 10 criminal cases that made news headlines within the past 20 years or so. And in every instance, it was because the case was such an outlier when it comes to the usual crimes that take place all over the country. Crimes like, can't say that word without getting demonetized. I'm trying to be more careful about demonetization on YouTube because I'm getting destroyed. I'm getting absolutely battered. And it's really sad because I like money. But it's like, oh yeah, demonetized. That we did like a 5-hour episode or 4-hour episode about, I can't remember who it was.
Jeffrey Dahmer. He was a cannibal and he kept severed heads in his freezer.
It wasn't Gacy somehow. Don't tell YouTube. That's monetized somehow. But the second big boy we did, it's just like, you know how much money I spent on that? It's like, oh my God, it's so... Making a 5-hour video, not even including my time, is extremely expensive. And then YouTube are like, no money for you. And it's like, oh, why do I even bother? So look, it's a crime. It's like sex when you don't want it. Hijackings, armed robberies, domestic violence, and corruption. But the murder of Reeva Steenkamp was notable for an entirely different reason. Her murderer was Oscar Pistorius, the Paralympic athlete who'd made international news headlines just 6 months earlier when he became the first Paralympic athlete to compete in the Olympic Games. Oh, really? Oh, I didn't know that. That's crazy. Wait, I don't know anything about this. I don't follow sport at all. But I assumed the dudes in the Paralympics who have like blade legs or whatever, aren't they faster than the dudes with regular legs? Because those blade legs, they seem pretty fast, and they're probably made out of like titanium carbon fiber composite turbo material or whatever. So aren't those dudes going to be faster? Aren't they going to have an advantage? Look, if you've got some sort of springs in your legs to help you jump higher, you're going to be able to jump higher than a dude with regular legs, right? Just like many other South Africans, I was familiar with the details surrounding Reeva's death. I joined in on the discussions surrounding Oscar's guilt. I speculated about his motives and actions that night, and I watched his month-long trial alongside my colleagues on a TV screen in the reception area at work. And I remember how anticlimactic it felt when he was found guilty and everything around me continued on as usual. The world didn't shift, forever changed. There wasn't any cathartic sense of satisfaction you get when the killer gets what he deserves. And I think that's because we never got a satisfactory end to Reeva's story. We never found out what happened that night, and we never found out why Oscar had ended up killing Reeva. Okay, so wait, he was guilty of surrounding guilt, Reeva's death, murder. Is it confirmed as murder? I want to stay there so I don't have to sprinkle it with allegedlys, but you can kill people in more ways than murder. But I've now read several books on the topic and have rewatched the entire court case, so join me as we delve deeper into the murder of Reeva Steenkamp, explore some of the details that never made their way to court, and try to shed a better light on what really happened that Valentine's Day morning. The Paralympic athlete. Oscar Leonard Carl Pistorius was born on the 22nd of November 1986 in Sandton, an upscale suburb in Johannesburg. He was born with a condition called, fibular hemimelia, which means that he was born without a fibula. Tibia, fibula, that's the forward-facing tibia, fibula, the backwards-facing bone in the lower part of the leg, if I remember my biology from school. You got the femur, and then you got the tibula and the fibula, right? Downstairs. One of the long bones in your lower leg that anchors your calf muscles and forms the outside of your ankle. As a result, his lower legs were severely deformed and he only had 2 toes on each foot. His doctors informed his parents that he'd never be able to walk, but they consulted 11 different specialists and devised 3 different scenarios for Oscar's future. Wow, 11 different specialists? I know it's good to get a second opinion, but goddamn. 1, they accepted the fact that Oscar would be confined to a wheelchair for the rest of his life. 2, they waited until he was older and then signed him up for 11 painful experimental reconstructive surgeries, which had a limited chance of success and would span over a period of 16 years. Or 3, they amputate his little legs to give him the option of learning to walk with prostheses when he was older. Prostheses? Prosthetic legs? What's the correct thing there? Dr. Jerry Versfeld eventually convinced Mr. and Mrs. Pistorius to amputate the 11-month-old Oscar's legs, but he explained he would do his best to provide Oscar with an added advantage. Dr. Versfeld salvaged Oscar's heel pads and added them to the end of Oscar's stumps, enabling him to walk on them with minimum pain just a few weeks later. Whoa, really? That's crazy. His parents also encouraged Oscar to be as independent as possible, and he learned to walk on fiberglass prostheses by the time he was just 17 months old. That's only a little bit after you'd normally learn to walk. That's amazing. According to Oscar, his mother raised him to see himself as an able-bodied man, and with the aid of prostheses, he played soccer, rode his mountain bike, and climbed trees just like any other boy his age. That's remarkable. It is incredible how plastic the brain is. Like, it can just adjust to learn new things. And you give them... it's amazing. In school, he took part in various sports like mountain biking, water polo, tennis, cricket, rugby, and Olympic wrestling, advancing to the provincial level in both water polo and tennis. It wasn't, goddamn, this guy was into sports. Or is into sports. He's not dead.
He's not free.
He is into sports, isn't he? It wasn't always easy, and some days he developed painful sores on the bottom of his stumps, requiring long periods of recovery. But still, he motored on. According to Paul Anthony, who was Oscar's rugby coach and housemaster at Pretoria Boys High School, housemaster is a word I haven't heard in like 20-something years. Housemaster. He never let you be in a position where you might feel sorry for him. It was amazing how motivated and confident he was, how completely he put you at ease about the fact that he was missing his legs. He had no complex that you could see. He never came across as a kid without legs. But according to Oscar, the other boys never let him forget it. When he was 15, he woke up one night to the other boys yelling and found that his room was on fire. When he reached for his legs, they were gone, and for a few moments he was convinced that he was going to die, helpless and alone. That is up. It's like, oh, boys will be boys. These boys are going to grow up to be psychos.
One of them did.
Dude, they set his room on fire? Bro, we'd like shave each other's eyebrows off, not set rooms on fire. Christ. The other boys doused the flames and laughed at Oscar over his helplessness. It turns out that they'd used lighter fuel to start the fires to scare Oscar, trying to drive home the fact that without his legs, he was nothing. What the dude? This is up. Those boys are probably in prison right now. In the all-boys school, it was very much a case of adapt or die, figuratively speaking, of course. According to John Carlin, the author of Chase Your Shadow, The Trials of Oscar Pistorius, Pretoria Boys High had an almost militaristic culture when Oscar attended the school, with the older boys lording it over the younger ones. As one student put it, if you were a junior in Pretoria Boys High, quote, you were in constant fear of transgressing the norms. You were the slave class of the boarding and house systems. As a result, Oscar did what he could not to be seen as weak. As he got older, he would take part in the bullying and terrorizing of the younger students, but when he was 15, he signed up for the rugby team so that he had a better chance of fitting in. Now, I've seen Oscar run, and I can honestly say that I've never considered him to be anything less than capable. So when I first started to read he used to play rugby, I accepted the idea immediately. Yeah, sure, why not? I never went so far as to actually consider just how he'd managed it. After all, rugby is a very physical game, and Oscar wore prostheses. I'm thinking, wait, it's just on his legs, so he's running around, he's grabbing the ball. I guess you do get tackled in rugby, so that's going to be weird. Like the tackling, I don't know how it works in American football, which is, I feel like, the American equivalent of rugby, but just with like pads and you grab someone below the waist, so you've got to grab their legs and kind of grab them together so they fall over. I hate sports. Like, I hate rugby. I hated rugby. You'd just be out there. It'd be cold, like icy ground, and you'd be running around getting filthy muddy, and people would be like grabbing your legs to make you fall over, and I'd be like, why are we doing this to each other? It's horrible. Can't we just play a civilized sport? Like tennis? Golf? Something where we don't have to like grab each other and cover each other in mud and break legs and that. According to Anthony, he had considered what would happen if someone tackled Oscar, and he was present when that very thing happened. Oscar had the ball and made a run for the goal line when a player from the opposing team tackled him, and his prosthetic limbs went flying. The game stopped. He slipped his prostheses back on and carried on playing. Ozzy never ceased to astonish, but just as astonishing a thing for me that day was to discover how fast he was. Oscar told John Carlin that when he was 14, he fell at school and broke his prostheses. He called his grandmother and told her that he urgently needed new legs, and she managed to contact Francois van der Watt, a prosthetic specialist, who was then just starting out a prosthetics consultancy. He got rid of Oscar's 1950s-style wooden prostheses and gave him the modern lighter set that enabled him to play rugby. But after meeting Oscar, van der Watt wanted to go a step further. Quote, it was the year 2000, just before the Summer Olympics and the Paralympics. I was intrigued by this Paralympics thing, and I got hold of a promotional video for the games. I thought Oscar should take a look at it. He had no idea Paralympic sport existed, and he sat there watching the video in my office, absolutely absorbed. He was smiling, and I could sense a tingle in him. Watching that video sparked new dreams in the boy. Oscar became van der Watt's test subject, and together the two of them worked to develop a set of running blades that looked and functioned like the cheetah running blades that the Paralympians used. It took a year and over a dozen sets of running blades, but eventually they managed to design a set that Oscar could use for running. Wait, why didn't they just get the running blades from the people who make them for the Olympians? I mean, surely they're not all custom made, right? There must be a company that makes running blades. And as van der Watt watched Oscar run on his homemade set of blades, he felt pride in his design and didn't immediately realize that he'd just given Oscar his own set of wings. I don't understand why they're custom made. Just buy them. I know it's the past and stuff, but you could still, surely there's still shops, or like you can order this from another country via the telephone or whatever. And it's not a money thing. I get the feeling like Oscar seems quite rich, doesn't he? Like he goes to a fancy school. He had 11 specialists consult on his surgery. He's got these like fancy legs, and his parents seem to be like very, encouraging of him or whatever. And he plays all these sports. seems pretty well taken care of, right? And to quote, "To me, he was just a kid, shy, but a bit of a joker, who laughed a lot, played pranks, and put staples into his legs to freak people out who didn't know that he wore prosthetics. I was just doing my job for a nice Pretoria kid with no plan or bigger goals. I was just helping the kid have a good life." When Oscar was 16, he injured his knee during a rugby match, and for a few months he had to undergo intense rehabilitation sessions at the University of Pretoria's High Performance Centre. It was Dr. Versfeld, the very man who'd amputated his legs, who told him that sprinting was the best cure for his injured knee. Coach Ampi Lau, an athletics coach at the UP High Performance Centre, trained Oscar, and within 2 months of his training, Oscar would set his first world record as a double amputee when he ran a 100-metre sprint in 11.27 seconds. I know that's insanely fast. It's also a world record. He did it in 2 months? Instantly qualifying for the 2004 Athens Paralympic Games. But if he wanted to run at the Paralympic Games, Oscar needed a new set of legs. Again, Van der Watt came to Oscar's rescue. He'd just moved to the US to work for Össur, an Icelandic company that specialized in developing prostheses, and he invited Oscar to fly over to the US so that he could be fitted for the FlexFoot cheetah blades that would turn him into the Blade Runner. According to journalist Josh McHugh's 2007 article on Oscar titled Blade Runner, quote, "If you're missing a leg, owning an Össur is like driving a BMW M series." Okay, so maybe they were just expensive or whatever, and we'll see exist. I guess they do have to be custom made, right? Or custom fitted or whatever. So I guess, yeah, okay, I understand. There's obviously levels to this. While he was there, Oscar took part in the Endeavor Games in Oklahoma and won the 200-meter sprint, making news headlines in the US. 8 months after that, he won gold during the 200-meter race at the 2004 Paralympic Games in Athens and set a new world record with his time of 21.97 seconds. He was just 17 years old and hadn't even finished high school yet, but now he had sponsors dogging him around every corner, promising him whatever his teenage heart could desire. He would go on to compete against able-bodied athletes in the 2005 South African Championships, where he placed 6th and then won gold in the 100 and 200-meter races during the 2005 Paralympic World Cup. At the 2006 IPCA Athletics World Championships, he won 3 gold medals, breaking his 200-meter record for the second time in 2 years, and so would set 2 more world records during the Nedbank Championships for the physically disabled in April 2007. Okay, something I'm learning right now. I was like Oscar Pistorius, Olympic athlete who murdered killed somebody. Apparently I'm learning right now, incredible athlete. I had no idea he was this good. He seems to be like that swimming dude. Michael something? Michael Phelps? Am I getting that right? Like I said, don't know sports. He was a rising star, He's breaking world records already. And he'd soon become a minor celebrity, and by the time he won his bid to compete in the 2012 Olympic Games in London, the entire world was prepared to cheer him on, awed by both his talent and his determination to succeed despite his perceived disability. And even though he didn't win a medal, he was chosen to carry the South African flag during the closing ceremony. By August 2012, everyone and their dog had heard of Oscar Pistorius, even if they didn't exactly know why he was famous. But just 6 months later, his life came to a screeching halt when he shot and killed Reeva Steenkamp. I don't know if I knew the name Oscar Pistorius because I don't follow sport at all. Someone was making fun of me because I thought there was some famous athlete or whatever with a name like, it was a generic name or a foreign name or something, and I didn't know they were apparently super famous, and I called him a woman because I just had no idea who he was. The loving couple. Reeva was born Reeva Rebecca Steenkamp on the 19th of August 1983 in Cape Town, South Africa, to Barry and June Steenkamp. Each of them had a child from their previous marriages, but June explained that they'd been enamored with Reeva since birth because they'd both thought that they were already too old to have more children. Her father trained race horses, and as a result, Reeva grew to love the proud and temperamental animals. Are horses temperamental? I always thought horses were like super chill. Oh. You learn something. I know nothing about animals as well. Sports and animals, nothing. I know nothing about nothing, but sports and animals, particular blank spots of mine. She attended her first horse show when she was 4, started placing bets on horse races when she was in primary school, and used her winnings to pay for her own school fees, realizing at a young age that her parents weren't doing that well financially. When Reeva was 7 years old, they moved to Port Elizabeth, an industrial city on the southeastern coast of South Africa, where her father bought a plot of land and continued to train horses. There, Reeva attended St. Dominic's Priory School, and her old school teachers would describe her as being, quote, vibrant, friendly, and diligent. She was a popular pupil, respected by her peers and authorities. She did well in both school and sports and went on to win a bursary when she matriculated in 2001. She decided to pursue a law degree from the Nelson Mandela Metropolitan University and completed her degree in 2005. But Reeva was reconsidering her decision to pursue a career in law since she wanted to become a professional model instead. She'd been involved in modeling since she was 14, and during her years at university, she'd been named as a finalist in both the Faces of the Future and Miss Port Elizabeth competitions. When Reeva was 20, she was helping her father train a horse when she had an accident and broke her back. According to an interview Reeva did in a blog titled The Bucket in 2011, quote, "After some time in hospital with some rehabilitation, I returned to class and made the decision to never let go of my dreams and aspirations. With this in mind, I finished my degree instead of taking a year off for rest, and I pursued my dreams of becoming a model in the big city. I could have been in a wheelchair, but I was blessed to fully recover from the tragic experience." It took me a long time to realize that I thought breaking your back meant like breaking your spine, but obviously they're two different things. They can be correlated, but not always. In 2007, Reeva signed with Ice Models Agency and moved to Johannesburg, the heart of the fashion industry in South Africa, to try and make a name for herself. According to her best friend and fellow model, Samantha Gravenstein, quote, "She was a little bit shyer in those days. She was very honest about the fact that she wanted to become someone, and so she worked hard at it, going to launches and any party that she got invited to. She needed to be seen out." End quote. Part of that included the requirement that the already stunningly beautiful Reeva had to lose around 15 kilograms. That's 33 pounds. Oh my god, that's a lot of weight. I'm assuming because of the beauty standards of the beauty industry, that she's already quite thin. According to the then editor of FHM magazine, Hagen Engler, she attended 8 casting sessions before she was finally considered to be included in their calendar. She wouldn't feature on the cover of the calendar, but her sassy coquettishness had won her a place on the cover of FHM magazine instead, and in 2011 and 2012, she had the title of one of the top 100 sexiest women in the world. After her death, Engler would tell the Daily Maverick, quote, "She had trained herself to flawless superfitness, was tanned and taught, but what set her apart was the attitude, that same knowing wink. She knew what this game was all about, and she was willing to play it." In 2011, Reeva broke up with her boyfriend and moved into a flat with another close friend of hers, makeup artist Gina Myers, and her family. According to Gina's parents, Reeva quickly became a part of the family. She was always cooking for the family, always keeping her room spotless, and always letting us know when she was coming home or not when she left the house, although she rarely stayed out overnight. Reeva spent most nights at home watching TV or talking and laughing with Kim and Gina. Reeva seems really nice. I don't like that because we know what's going to happen. And I know this is on purpose, but it just makes me sad. In November 2012, Reeva was selected to take part in the 5th season of a local reality TV show called Tropica Island of Treasure. It was filmed on location in Jamaica. Nice. I guess it's not that nice. You have to go on and it's, there's cameras following you around and stuff. In my mind, I'm like, woo, free trip to Jamaica. And it's like, you could just go to Jamaica on holiday, but it's still like, ooh, free. And it's not free. You're definitely working. It was filmed on location in Jamaica and would be a lot like Survivor if the competitors were all minor celebrities, were allowed to live in 5-star hotels, walk around in bikinis, and party on yachts after the cameras had been switched off for the day. As we say in South Africa, it sounds like a jol. Okay, sounds like a jol. How does South African accents? I should definitely know this. My grandma has one. Sound African. Like this brew. What's that? Brew. Yes, brew. Sounds like a jol brew. Sounds like a, I'm going Australian. Oh, it's so hard. As we say in South Africa. South Africa. It's probably just offensive, isn't it? I'm sorry, South Africans. According to Samantha, after her stint on Tropica Island of Treasure, Reeva was considering becoming a TV presenter and moving away from the superficial world of modeling. Jennifer Sue, a local radio and television personality, confirmed this when she told City Press that Reeva asked me about TV presenting. She was interested in branching out beyond FHM and modeling to do more TV work. We made a lunch date where I was going to take her into the studio and make some introductions. Samantha was dating Justin Tavares, the founder and CEO of Daytona, a luxury car showroom that sells high-end sports cars and luxury vehicles to the creme de la creme of South African society. She's mixing in this elite world. It's, it's quite exciting, isn't it? Daytona hosted a track day at the Kyalami racetrack, and Samantha had invited Reeva along. That is where she met Oscar, who was close friends of Justin's. Samantha had met him before, and, quote, "I thought he was a great guy. I'd still say I'd never come across a guy who was so mannered in this day and age, polite, considerate. I thought he was a lot of fun. I thought he was a great guy. That's why I hung out with him." At the time, Oscar was dating a woman called Samantha Taylor, but their relationship was already on the rocks. Oscar needed a last-minute date to the South African Sports Awards on the 4th of November 2012, so Justin recommended that he should invite Reeva along. There's so many people, I got a bit lost. I'm trying to work out who's who. So we've got Oscar, and he wants to go to these awards, and he needs a date. So Samantha, who is Justin recommends that he should take Reeva along. That is her friend Samantha's boyfriend. Okay, that's a bit weird, isn't it? It'd be like your friend's boyfriend is like, why don't you take this person? Go with Oscar. And it's like, well, we're both in relationships. Who are you? Why are you saying this? According to Samantha, Reeva only had an hour to get ready, so she scraped her hair back, threw a little white tassel dress on, and dazzled everyone at the event. That night, Reeva told the City Press newspaper that, "We're just friends. I promise I'll tell you if there's anything more. It's just a coincidence that we're sitting at the same table and arrived in the same car." But during the night, Oscar made quite the impression on Reeva, although she did have some concerns regarding his age. You see, I never knew this, but Reeva was 29 at the time, and Oscar was only 25. It also turned 26 at the end of November, but according to Samantha, a smitten Reeva said that he's very mature for his age. Obviously, with what he's had to deal with and being in the public eye since he was so young, achieving what he's achieved, he must be more mature for his age. Despite her concerns, the two of them started dating almost immediately following the sports awards. Gina explains that at first their relationship progressed too quickly to Reeva's taste, and initially Oscar came across as clingy and needy and demanding exactly what you want in a boyfriend. Sarcasm. Quote, if she got a message and she maybe read it and didn't write back straight away, he would write back, "Hi, what are you doing? Why didn't you write back?" And she was like, "Whoa, I can't deal with this." Yeah, dude. That's not how you handle that situation. Don't you know that? You're 25. Come on. Chill. Chill. During Oscar's murder trial, Gina would testify that when their relationship began, Oscar ran after her and called her incessantly. Reeva did like him, but did not like the pressure that he exerted on her. She often told me that she wished that he would just calm down a little bit. He would call her many times in the space of a few minutes. Once, when we went to a party in December, he drove past the house. She told me that she suspected he might have been checking up on her, and he said that he was just going to check out a Bentley with Justin. But she was convinced he was checking up on her, as he wouldn't usually be in that area, and it was 5 or 6 p.m. on a Sunday. It's a lame excuse, dude. What are you up to? Stop being so obsessive, it's weird. His obsessive habits led to Reeva Gina and Gina's sister Kim referring to Oscar as Reeva's stalker. The Myers became more concerned when Reeva told them how he'd scream and shout at her whenever they had a disagreement. She'd shut down, walk away and give him the silent treatment until it had time to calm down. Then she'd approach him via text, email or WhatsApp, tell him about her concerns, and they'd later talk it out in person. It's just a reminder of how recent and modern this is, that the fact that WhatsApp... How long has WhatsApp been around? 10 years? It can't have been around 10 years already, has it? I feel like no, because the iPhone, I feel like I first had an iPhone, 12 years ago? When was iPhone 3? That was my first iPhone, the 3G one. I feel like 2010? Maybe? 2009? Because we didn't have WhatsApp then, obviously, because we didn't have iPhones. She'd tell him about her concerns and they'd talk it out later in person. Despite these obvious concerns with his behavior towards her, Reeva would keep on making excuses for him, explaining that he was just tired, stressed, and had been training hard that week or he was feeling sick. But her friends noted the red flags that kept popping up throughout their relationship. Everything was always about him, his wants, his needs, his comfort, his career responses, his public image. He wanted her to always be at his side when they were attending events. When she proved that she was confident enough to socialize with others while he was busy talking to the press or his fans, he got irritated that she wasn't at his side, almost as if he was relying on her to shield him from the barrage of attention that he got at these events. On the 27th of January 2013, the couple attended the engagement party of one of Reeva's closest friends, Darren Fresco. According to Gina, they'd been fighting before they left the party, and the atmosphere between the two had been tense. The couple left early, and Reeva went home. That night, she and Oscar would continue fighting over the phone, and their text messages would be read out in court during Oscar's murder trial. Reeva explained that for 2 days prior, Oscar had been finding fault with everything she'd done, forcing her to feel like she had to walk on eggshells around him. He told her that her accents and voices were annoying, that she shouldn't chew gum because it irritated him, and he would cut her off mid-conversation because he'd lost interest in what she was saying. Bro. If you find yourself doing this, it's because you don't want to be in a relationship with this person anymore. You're also a dickhead. But break up with them. Grow some balls and break up with them. There you go. Easy, isn't it, Oscar? She told him that she didn't appreciate him making a scene at her friend Darren's party, resulting in them leaving early. She'd been looking forward to it, and he ruined it with his unfounded jealousy. But he explained that he'd just been upset because she'd dared to leave his side and speak to her friends when he was busy talking to his fans. He saw her talking to other men and immediately saw red, convinced that she was flirting with them, and it was made even worse when she'd stopped to talk to other people instead of immediately seeking him out whenever he left her side. After another event where they had a similar fight, Reeva told him, quote, "I thought it would make a difference in us getting out without you being harassed anymore. I didn't think you would criticize me for doing that, especially not so loudly so that others could hear. I might joke around and be all tomboyish at times, but I regard myself as a lady, and I didn't feel like one tonight after the way you treated me when we left. I'm a person too, and I appreciate that you invited me out tonight, and I realize that you get harassed, but I'm trying my best to make you happy, and I feel as though sometimes you never are, no matter the effort I put in. I can't be attacked by outsiders for dating you and be attacked by you, the one person I deserve protection from." Dr. Pixie Dutoit, a criminologist. Is that guy's name Pixie? Sorry, it's just funny. A criminologist who commented on Oscar's trial for Sky News explains that in her opinion, the relationship between Oscar and Reeva was emotionally abusive. That does sound... I mean, he's being a d***head. Obviously, this person is a psychologist that has way more and is way more informed than I am, but he just sounds like a dickhead right now. Well, I guess what's the difference between being a dick and being emotionally abusive? I don't know. It just makes me scared that sometimes I'm emotionally abusive when really I'm just a bit of a dick.
Ooh, feisty.
I mean, not with my wife. Although, I mean, like any people we fight, but I'm not gonna... The idea of being like, sorry, I'm not interested in what you're saying. Let's change the topic of your conversation. That's insane to me. That is the height of rudeness. Jesus. Quote, "A person in an abusive relationship, the abuser himself, he has what we refer to as a dual personality. In other words, he has this outward personality where he's a good person, everyone likes him, he is social and loving and everything. And then he also has an inward personality, which is the bad one, where he can be very manipulative and he can be cruel. So your abuser doesn't have to be aggressive or violent. He can be very subtle. And I think this is what happened here, because he criticized her, humiliated her in public, in front of their friends." I sound like I'm a terrible person, but doesn't everyone have a little bit of, I mean, not the abusive manipulation, cruel shit, but surely everyone has that, like, this is how I am with people who I don't know. Like, very well. It's like, oh yeah, nice to meet you, great, yeah. And then with your friends and your family, you could be a bit more honest and be like, no, I'm feeling a bit shit today. Because if you... oh, I'm not very happy about that. Or you have an argument. You don't have arguments with people you don't know because there's no emotional stakes. Isn't that... Am I overanalyzing this too much? Because I just feel like, yeah, there's a Simon who smiles and meets people and does this. And then there's also Simon when he's at home and he doesn't have to. Not in a mean or bad way, just in a more emotionally honest way. Probably a bit sometimes.
Aren't we all?
Oh, okay. By the time of the 12th of February 2013, the two of them had made up, and Reeva was planning on spending the night before Valentine's Day at Oscar's. She had their morning all planned out. She was going to get up early and prepare a picnic in the garden. Then she was going to make them pancakes with Nutella and give Oscar a set of framed photos that she'd made for him. She even bought a card that read, "I think today is a good day to tell you that I love you." But as we know, she never got the opportunity to carry out her plans, and Oscar's gift and the accompanying card was still on the kitchen counter when her body was carted away the next morning. I don't like it. Thursday, the 14th of February, 2013. Okay, so 10 years ago, pretty much. Oh, 10 years ago. More than 10 years ago? Time flies. In South Africa, summer is far from over by the time February rolls around, and it's not unusual for one heat wave after another to hit Pretoria as a last hurrah before autumn hits us out of the blue by the middle of March. Yeah, the Southern Hemisphere. It's like backwards land. It's like autumn in March? Crazy. As such, the evening of the 13th of February 2013 was especially hot and humid, and more than one family living in or around Silverwood's country estate had left their windows open, hoping for relief from the pressing heat. It was 1:58 a.m. and Estelle van der Merwe felt especially irritated. She'd been woken up by the sounds of an argument drifting through the open windows of their bedroom, and even though she couldn't hear what the argument was about or even what language they were speaking, she could clearly hear that it was a woman who was doing most of the talking. Eventually, Estelle pulled her pillow over her head in an effort to go back to sleep, but the argument continued for at least another half hour. Then, just as Estelle started dozing off, 4 loud bangs echoed through the night. Oh my god. Can you imagine? You'd be like, did I dream that? I would in that like Twilight thing, I'd be like, I dreamed that. And then there'd be 3 more shots and I'd be like, I'm not dreaming that. And I think I would call the police. I'd definitely call the police in that situation. That's a police calling situation. Just in case, you know? Probably nothing. It's probably just cars backfiring after an argument, statistically. But that's a police calling situation. The police won't be angry that you're called. Her husband Jacques jerked awake and immediately confirmed Estelle's suspicions. The sounds they'd heard were gunshots. The hollow, knocking sound was incredibly distinctive. Jacques got out of bed and looked out of the bedroom window, trying to see if he could spot the shooter. When he couldn't, he got back into bed, but then he heard more indistinct, loud noises, and Jacques called the estate security to ask them what was going on, just as the sound of crying drifted over the night air towards them. Estelle got up and joined her husband at the window, as they both watched as cars pulled up outside 286 Bushwillow Crescent, the home of Oscar Pistorius. Oh, okay, so there's a security guard in there, like South Africa, of course there is. There's security guards everywhere. I'd just call that dude. I'd be like, yo, do something about this. Call the police. That's what you do, right? That's you're my point of contact. Go, go, go. But they weren't the only ones who'd been woken up by the drama that was playing out in the Pistorius home. Just after 3 a.m., Michelle Berger and her husband Charles had also been awoken by what sounded like a terrified woman screaming. Charles got up and headed towards the open doors on their balcony, and now he could clearly make out the terrified voice of a woman calling for help intermingled with the shouts of a man. Convinced that they were listening to an armed robbery in progress, Michelle called the estate security and handed the phone to her husband. It took Charles a minute to realize that they'd called the wrong number, but by then 4 loud cracks sounded. Bang, 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 bang. The woman had kept on screaming while the shots rang out, but it was only after the final bang that her cries faded away. Charles took a step back into the bedroom, shocked by what had just heard, and Michelle told her husband, I hope that woman didn't see her husband being shot in front of her. Oh, because they still think it's a robbery. Right. In the Silverwoods estate, Annette Stipp woke up at 3:02 a.m. to fetch a glass of water from the kitchen. She was barely out of bed when she heard the distinct sound of gunshots. Her husband, Dr. Johann Stipp, had also woken up and made his way to the balcony of their bedroom to see if he could find out what was going on. Then he heard the screams. Dr. Stipp noticed that the lights were on in Oscar's bathroom, and he and Annette moved to another balcony, trying to get a better vantage point. The screams continued, and Dr. Stipp called the police, convinced that they were listening to a family being murdered. He dialed 10111, the police's emergency number, but the number was out of order. What the f***? He dialed 999, it's like, boo-doo-doo. It is South Africa, I guess they were busy. So if you're wondering why everyone is calling estate security instead of the police, well, now you know. Dr. Stipp dressed in a hurry, continually trying to call the police, but he was determined to go and see if he could help whoever was in trouble. Brave man, good lord. That was when he heard 3 loud bangs. Convinced that the shooter was still actively firing at someone, Dr. Stipp shouted at Annette and told her, get away from the windows. Dr. Stipp finally called estate security and told them that there was an emergency. When he finished the call, he heard a man calling for help 3 times. Oscar's panicked cries for help also sparked 2 of his closest neighbors into action, and they called estate security. One of them, Michael Nungagetwa, called security at 3:16 a.m. and told them, can you quickly come up and check what's going on here? There is a person desperately crying, and I'm sure he needs help. The security guard on duty was Peter Barber. He was the shift leader and was responsible for coordinating with the 3 other security guards on duty that night. Just after 3 a.m., one of the guards reported that he'd heard gunshots. Then the calls started coming in, and Barber sent one of the other guards to find out where the gunshots had come from. He then called one of his other team members and told them to come and collect him from the security office so that they could go and check on the source of the gunshots. Together they drove to Dr. Stipp's house and found him standing on his balcony pointing toward the home of Oscar Pistorius. Dr. Stipp watched the security guard's car leave and studied Oscar's house. He distinctively saw a man walking around in the bathroom from left to right, and despite knowing that security was already headed toward Oscar's house, Dr. Stipp got in his car and headed over as well, feeling compelled to help whoever had been shot. Dr. Stipp sounds like they're the hero, doesn't he, to be honest? At 3:21 a.m, Oscar called security, but the call didn't go through, and Barber immediately called him back. Barber would later say that a crying Oscar had told him, security, everything is fine. But Oscar would insist had said, security, I am fine. Either way, Oscar wasn't fine. He had called Johann Stander, a close friend of his who also lived in the estate, at 3:19 a.m, and told him, Johann, please. I shot Reeva. I thought she was an intruder. Please, come quick. FYI, is Afrikaans for uncle. Okay. Carice Viljoen had woken up when her dog started barking, and she was on her way to close the open sliding doors that led to the balcony when she heard Oscar's cries for help. She met her father in the hallway, telling him that, "I heard someone screaming for help. Someone's in trouble." Johan Stander told his daughter that Oscar had shot Reeva, and the two of them got into Carice's Mini Cooper and raced towards Oscar's house. And when they got there, Peter Barbar and the other two security guards had already arrived. Carice noted that the lights were on and that the front door was unlocked and partially open. Together, they watched as Oscar carried Reeva down the stairs, and then they all rushed inside to help. Oscar was visibly relieved when he saw the Standers and begged Carice, please, can we put her in the car and get her to the hospital?" But Carice ordered him to put Reeva down, hoping that they'd be able to stop the bleeding and save Reeva. She ran upstairs for towels, and when she returned to Oscar's side, he was begging Reeva to stay with him. Together, they placed towels on the gunshot wounds on Reeva's right arm and hip, and Carice asked Oscar what had happened. Oscar simply replied with, "I thought she was an intruder." Then Dr. Stipp arrived at Oscar's house, and he told Johan Stander that he was a radiologist and he might be able to help. Stander showed him inside, and Dr. Stipp took in the scene. A bloody Reeva was lying on her back, her head pointing towards the front door. Oscar was at her left side, one hand pressing down on her right hip, and the other in her mouth, trying to keep it open so that she could breathe. Dr. Stipp knelt down next to Reeva and checked her for a pulse, but there was none. He then checked her wrist, but still couldn't find one. When he opened her right eyelid, he noted that the eye was already turning a milky white, a telltale sign that she'd been dead for some time. Convinced that there was nothing they could do for her, Dr. Stipp took note of Reeva's injuries. She'd been shot in her right thigh, hip and upper arm. She'd also received a gunshot wound to the right side of her head, and by the looks of it, Dr. Stipp knew that she'd been dead within seconds of being shot. It had been 25 minutes since the 4 gunshots had woken up the residents of the Silverwoods country estate. Dr. Stipp left Oscar next to Reeva and then went to stand outside next to the Standers, telling them that it's very bad. He called the trauma centre at Wilgers Hospital, and they instructed him to contact the Netcare ambulance services. Johan Stander called the ambulance, and Peter Barbar had managed to contact the Boschkop police station to report the shooting. It took less than 20 minutes for the ambulance services to arrive, and at 3:50 a.m., the paramedics declared that Reeva Steenkamp was dead. Inside 286 Bushwillow Crescent. At 3:30 a.m. that Thursday morning, Lieutenant Colonel Schoenby van Rensburg received the news that there'd been a shooting at 286 Bushwillow Crescent in the Silverwoods country estate. He and Constable Christelle Prinsloo arrived at Oscar's home at 3:55 a.m. Estate security had already set up a perimeter to control who had access to the street and Oscar's house, and Dr. Stipp's BMW, Carice's Mini Cooper, and the ambulance were the only vehicles parked outside Oscar's house that morning. When Van Rensburg entered the foyer, he saw the body lying at the foot of the stairs, covered in towels. The paramedics told him that she had been dead on arrival and showed him the various injuries that she had sustained. Van Rensburg then made his way into the kitchen where Carice and an emotional Oscar stood. Oscar looked dreadful. His hair was mussed and he was still actively crying. Blood was smeared across his bare chest and arms, and the blood on his left bicep indicated where Reeva's head rested when he carried her down the stairs. The right side of his grey Nike shorts was soaked in blood, and drops of blood dotted his prostheses and the tops of his socks. He was anxiously pacing in the kitchen and didn't seem able or willing to answer any of Van Rensburg's questions. Instead, Carice spoke on his behalf, relating what she knew and had seen to the police. Van Rensburg left the house to call in an investigative team. One of the people he called was Captain Hilton Botha, a police detective with over 24 years of investigative experience. 15 minutes later, Captain Botha parked his car outside Oscar's home, and he would later tell Vanity Fair that, quote, "It was a big house, very neat and tidy, and you could see the money talking, with all the ornaments and portraits and paintings. There were shelves stacked with trophies. There was also one of those big box frames with a picture of Mike Tyson, along with a signed boxing glove." Van Rensburg and Botha walked through the house, following the trail of blood that led up the stairs, down a hallway, past a sitting area, and into the carpeted bedroom. From there, they turned a corner to the left, passing the unmade bed, and led down a hallway toward the bathroom. As they entered the bathroom, a corner bath was to their left, a set of his and her sinks was on the right, and the shattered wooden door that led to a toilet cubicle was in the far corner. Inside, blood covered the toilet and floor. 3 panels had been knocked out of the top section of the door, and the broken panels and wood splinters were scattered around it. On the immediate right of the door was a rumpled grey bath mat. On it, they found Reeva's iPhone and Oscar's revolver, and a bloodied cricket bat lay on the floor next to smears of blood and a grey, bloody towel. There was a large window on their left and a smaller window inside the cubicle directly above the toilet. Both Van Rensburg and Botha noted that one of the sliding windows in the bathroom was open. Outside, the police would later find that one of Reeva's jeans was lying underneath the window of the toilet. The investigative team spent the morning processing the scene while Oscar was told to wait inside the garage. His brother, Carl Pistorius, and his lawyer, Kenny Aldridge, had arrived to assist him, and they kept him company as they waited on the police to let them know what the next steps would be. Yeah, so I feel like I've just read like tons of this. I was completely engrossed in it. I know this channel's also like Simon comments on it, but like very engrossing stuff. This is very, very nicely written, Emma. I'm having a very good time today. I just looked at the clock on the recording. I'm like, already? I think it's smart. Like, even if this is exactly how it happened, yes, even if it's how he says, like he was mistaken, he thought she was an intruder, whatever, and the police show up, you still shot someone. It makes a lot of sense to shut your mouth until your lawyer gets there. I think that's totally reasonable. Captain Botha felt sure he knew what had happened that morning and did later tell Vanity Fair, he shot her, that's it. I was convinced that it was murder, and I told my colonel, you already read him his rights, so you have to arrest him. End quote. And when Captain Botha asked Oscar what had happened that morning, Oscar repeated his claim that he thought Reeva was a burglar, but Botha didn't believe him. Quote, it was just them in the house, and according to the security registers, she'd been staying there for 2 to 3 days, so he had to be used to her by that time. At around 10 that morning, Lieutenant Colonel Van Rensburg would formally arrest Oscar Pistorius for the murder of his girlfriend Reeva Steenkamp, and Oscar was taken to the Boschkop police station for processing. It was an accident. Oscar Pistorius was officially charged with the premeditated murder of Reeva Rebecca Steenkamp on the 15th of February 2013, and his bail hearing was set for the 19th of February, which was a Tuesday. Over the course of the weekend, speculation ran rife as to the circumstances of the shooting. Had the couple fought that night? Had Oscar killed Reeva in a roid-fueled rage? Why did the police find a bloodied cricket bat in the bathroom? Had he shot her in the bedroom, resulting in her fleeing toward the perceived safety of the toilet? But on the 19th of February, the media obtained a copy of Oscar's bail application, and the world learned Oscar's version of what had happened that night. The following description of events is taken directly from that bail application, but I am adding in more descriptive detail from his testimony in court where necessary, so that I won't have to explain it again later on. Very nice, very nicely done. Good idea. According to Oscar, Reeva was supposed to spend the day with her friends in Johannesburg, but eventually they would arrange to spend the night at his house instead. They ate dinner at 7 p.m, and at around 10 p.m. that night, Oscar claims that they'd both been in the bedroom. Reeva was doing her yoga exercises, and he was sitting on the bed watching TV without his prostheses, which stood at the foot of the bed. Quote, we were deeply in love, and I could not be happier. I know she felt the same way. She'd given me a present for Valentine's Day, but asked me to only open it the next day. Okay, it's a bit weird, isn't it? Well, what was the gift again? Was it something that only was relevant the next day? I don't think so. Oscar continued to explain that in the early hours of the 14th of February, he woke up because he was feeling hot and realized that the balcony door was still open. He got up and walked over to the balcony on his stumps, passing the bed, which was on his left, and as he neared the balcony, the right-hand side of the bed where Reeva was at his back. A silver tripod fan stood out on the balcony, and Oscar claims that he carried the fan inside and was in the process of closing the sliding doors, the blinds, and the curtains when he heard a noise in the bathroom. I felt a sense of terror rushing over me. There are no burglar bars across the bathroom window, and I knew that contractors who'd worked at my house had left the ladders outside. I believed that someone had entered my house. I was too scared to switch a light on. Oscar explains that he went to grab the 9mm pistol. He kept the pistol underneath the left-hand side of the bed, meaning that he had to walk around the foot of the bed to get the pistol. He then walked on his stumps down the carpeted hallway that led to the bathroom, shouting at the intruder to get out of his house and simultaneously ordering Reeva to call the police. He explains that it had been pitch dark in the bedroom and he thought Reeva was still in bed at the time. When he entered the bathroom, he noticed that the bathroom window was open and that the door to the toilet was closed. He didn't see anyone in the bathroom and assumed the intruder was hiding in the toilet. Quote, it filled me with horror and fear of an intruder or intruders being inside the toilet. I thought he or they must have entered through the unprotected window. As I did not have my prosthetic legs on and felt extremely vulnerable, I knew I had to protect Reeva and myself. I believed that when the intruders came out of the toilet, we would be in grave danger. I felt trapped as my bedroom door was locked and I had limited mobility on my stumps. This is a bloody good excuse if that's what it is, right? It's well thought out. It plays on sympathies. I'm sure there's things that are going to get it picked apart in court because, as we know, he goes to jail. But it is a very well thought out excuse, isn't it? It's quite impressive. Prima facie. Probably going to get destroyed. Like, there's going to be something like it wasn't pitch dark in the bedroom. There's going to be something that catches him. But it seems very good. Oscar claims that it shouted at the intruder to get out before he fired 4 shots at the toilet door. Once again, he called to Reeva, ordering her to call the police. When she didn't respond, he moved backwards out of the bathroom, keeping his eyes on the toilet door, and continued his way down the hallway. He didn't turn on the light when he reached the bedroom, and that is when he realized Reeva wasn't in bed. It dawned on him that she might have been in the toilet, and he rushed back towards the bathroom and tried to open the toilet door, but it was locked. Oscar claims to then have rushed back to the bedroom, where he opened the sliding door of the balcony and screamed for help. He then put on his legs, ran back to the bathroom, and tried to kick the door open. He's not sure. I'm like, why doesn't he just break down the door? And it's like, I can't, he doesn't have legs. Okay. He then put his legs back on, ran back to the bathroom, and tried to kick the door open. He's not sure when he turned on the bathroom light, but claims that it must have been around this time. He then went to fetch his cricket bat from the bedroom, and he repeatedly hit the toilet door with it. He tore out the broken panels and felt for the key, but it had fallen to the ground. He leaned over the broken door, picked up the key, and unlocked it. Inside, Reeva was slumped over the toilet. Oscar battled to pick her up and eventually dragged her into the bathroom. He then called Johan Stander and an ambulance service before he rushed downstairs and opened the front door. The ambulance service told him not to wait for the ambulance, but to take Reeva to the hospital as quickly as he could, so he rushed back upstairs to collect her. He picked her up and carried her downstairs, and there he and Carice tried to help her, but Reeva died in his arms. It's very well thought out. It sounds so believable, doesn't it? It's so believable. It's so thought out. To quote, "With the benefit of hindsight, I believe that Reeva went to the toilet when I was out on the balcony to bring the fan in. I also know that the events of that tragic night were as I have described them, and that in due course, I have no doubt the police and expert investigators will bear this out." Advocates Jerry Nell and Andrea Johnson were appointed as the state prosecutors in the matter of Oscar Pistorius and the state, and Jerry Nell would become a household name by the time the trial was over. For those who are unaware of what the term advocate means, an advocate is an attorney that is specialized in a specific field of law, in this case, criminal law. In Behind the Door, the Oscar Pistorius and Reeva Steenkamp story, journalists Barry Bain and Mandy Weiner describe the advocate Jerry Nell as, quote, "a diminutive Afrikaans-speaking man with a hard, creased face and short, white blonde hair who is a relentless prosecutor with a fastidious obsession with detail. His wit is dry and sarcasm thick, and he rarely shows emotion. He is known for his patience in meticulously building cases and will carefully craft a conviction witness by witness until the full picture of his strategy emerges." This guy sounds like a legend. He sounds like the sort of guy who's, if he's prosecuting you, you're like, I'm going to have to get a more expensive lawyer. We've got Jerry. In the charge sheet that was presented to the court during Oscar's bail application, advocates Nell and Johnson state that the applicant shot and killed an unarmed innocent woman during the early hours of 14th of February 2013. The incident took place in the residence of the applicant, and we are confident that it will not be in dispute that the applicant fired 4 shots, 3 of which hit the deceased and caused her death. Oscar was charged with premeditated murder, which is a Schedule 6 offense, meaning that it is considered to be more serious than simple murder, or culpable homicide, which is a Schedule 5 offense. Okay, it should be more serious? Because this is like, we're asking whether it's manslaughter or murder, right? Surely that'd be a less serious, but okay, let's see. This was because, even in his own version, he readied himself and walked to the bathroom with the clear intention and plan to kill the burglar, and did so whilst the burglar was harmless and contained in a toilet. This in itself also constitutes premeditated murder of a defenseless burglar. That sounds like a bit much, to be honest, because he's afraid. This seems a bit much to call that premeditated murder. Right? I can't believe so far I'm like on Oscar Pistorius' side. I'm not on his side because we know what happens. But it's a very good story. And the premeditated murder sounds a bit harsh. It also meant that Oscar wouldn't just be granted bail. According to his charge sheet, Oscar would have to convince the court that it was within the interest of justice that he should be granted bail. In his bail application, Oscar's defense argues that he had friends, family, and numerous assets, the value of 7 million South African rand that bound him to the country, and that he wouldn't constitute a flight risk. He also offered to surrender his passports should it be required of him, and agreed to comply with any bail conditions that the court seemed fit to impose on him. As a result, Oscar was released on 1 million rand in bail. It would have been approximately $73,000 at the time, with the condition that he handed over his passports and firearms, refrain from talking to any of the prosecution's witnesses, and regularly meet with his probation officer. Wait, isn't this guy rich? He's like rich and famous. He's like a famous athlete, and he only has 7 million rands worth of assets? How much is that? 73 times 7? It's like, what, $500,000? Something like that? $500,000 American? That doesn't sound like that much, does it? For like someone this famous? He also wasn't allowed to return to 286 Bushwillow Crescent or speak to any of the other residents of the Silverwoods country estate. And so, Oscar moved into a fully furnished garden cottage at the luxury home of his uncle, Oscar Pistorius, and had to wait another year to find out what his future held. And also his family's got money, right? Like, he's living in at his uncle's, estate in his luxury cottage, which he just has sitting empty. Okay. The trial of the century. Oscar's murder trial was scheduled for the 3rd of March 2014, and it was revealed that he would be facing a total of 4 charges. 1 count, premeditated murder, and 3 counts for contravention of the Firearms Control Act. 2 of the 3 firearm charges stated that on 2 different occasions, Oscar Pistorius had unlawfully discharged a weapon without a good reason to do so. The first offense took place on the 30th of September. Oh, these are different things, okay. 2010, when it fired a shot out of the sunroof of a moving vehicle. Oscar, what are you up to? The second offense took place in January 2013 when Oscar had handled a friend's Glock 27 pistol in the middle of a crowded restaurant and unwillingly squeezed the trigger, resulting in a shot going off. This is madness! Wait, why are these just coming up now? This guy should not have guns! He should not be allowed guns! Luckily, no one was injured. The third count related to unlicensed ammunition that had been found in his house during the police investigation. A week before Oscar's murder trial was to begin, several media houses had applied for permission to broadcast Oscar's trial, a first for South Africa. Judge President Dunstan Malambo agreed, stating that they would be allowed to broadcast sections of the trial, including the evidence presented and the testimony provided by the witnesses. However, the witnesses could request that their faces shouldn't be broadcast, and offered that the majority of them, including Oscar, would accept. Oscar's defense team had opposed the judgment, arguing that it would result in an unfair trial, but Judge Malambo ruled that it is in the public interest that within allowance limits, the goings-on during the trial be covered to ensure a greater number of people in the community who are unable to attend the proceedings are able to follow wherever they may be. But it could also be argued that the prosecution wanted to ensure that no one would be able to say afterwards that Oscar had received any special treatment, which, seeing as how quickly his bail hearing and his trial took place, was already indicative of the state's awareness of his status as a celebrity. The judge proceeding over Oscar's murder trial was Judge Thokozela Masipa, and she was assisted by 2 assessors, advocates who were chosen by Judge Masipa to help her judge on the issues of fact. For example, if the defense says a car involved a hit and run was green, the prosecution says the car is blue, the assessors will decide what color the car is. It's a simple example, since according to Kelly Phelps, a criminal law lecturer, quote, assessors are usually either experts in a particular field that is under scrutiny in a case, or advocates, magistrates, or legal academics. In this way, specialist cases are being dealt with by specialists in that area. In this case, one of the assessors, advocate Jeanette Hansen-Dutoit, was studying her doctorate in criminal law, criminal prosecution, the law of evidence, and constitutional interpretation. And the second assessor, advocate Themba Mazaboko, was considered a hardworking jack of all trades since he'd run his own hair salon and construction business before studying law and becoming an advocate. That guy has a diverse career. Hair salon, construction, lawyer. I could not imagine 3 more different jobs. Advocates Jerry Nell and Andrea Johnson would once again be arguing on behalf of the state, and Oscar would be represented by his lawyer and friend Kenny Aldridge and one of the best criminal advocates in the country, advocate Barry Rue. I'd already said that advocate Jerry Nell would become a household name over the course of the next 3 weeks, but every South African, whether or not they believed Oscar was guilty, would come to grudgingly respect advocate Barry Rue's skill as a criminal lawyer. The first indication many of us had that this wouldn't be a cut-and-dry murder case was when the first witness was called, Michelle Berger. She and her husband, Charles Johnson, lived 177 meters from Oscar's house, and they'd been woken up at 3 a.m. to the sounds of a woman screaming. From the balcony outside of their bedroom, they would have had a direct view of Oscar's bathroom window. Michelle told the court what she'd heard that night, explaining how the terrified screams only became louder as she and her husband listened to what they thought was an armed robbery in progress. She also explains that there had been a pause between the first shot and the second shot, which had been closely followed by a third and then a fourth shot. It was very traumatic for me. You could hear that it was blood-curdling screams, and it leaves you cold. You can't translate it in words, the anxiousness and fear in her voice. When they heard Oscar's version of what happened, quote, I told my husband that it couldn't be because it isn't what we heard that night. But advocate Barry Rue continually told Michelle that she'd heard incorrectly. She didn't hear a woman scream. She couldn't have heard the 4 shots. She'd heard Oscar cry for help and heard how he'd used the cricket bat to break down the door. Besides, she and her husband lived 177 meters from Oscar's house. There was no way that she would have been able to hear anything from that far away. But Michelle stood her ground and told the court that there were 4 gunshots, and I heard her petrified screaming sometime during the gunshots. And just after the gunshots was the last time I heard the same woman's voice. The same woman's voice that woke me that evening. But again, Advocate Rue told Michelle that she'd been mistaken. She hadn't heard Reeva that night. The screams she'd heard had come from Oscar, and Advocate Rue went on to explain that when he's anxious, his voice, when it pitches, it sounds like a woman screaming. I wouldn't say this is like a brilliant legal mind or argument. It's just like, okay, he's trying to find it seems very obvious. But I guess, is that just me? This seems like quite an obvious thing to argue. Like, it's like find an excuse. When Advocate Rue brought up her husband's testimony, he asked Michelle why it so closely matched hers.
Is he serious?
Well, because they were both witnessing the same thing, and they probably talked about it afterwards. Advocate Rue tried to argue that Michelle and her husband must have been conspiring together to incriminate Oscar. For what reason? What possible reason would they have? But Michelle said, of course it matched. We were in the same bedroom, the same bed, listening through the same window. I'm sorry, but I'm not so convinced that old Barry here is a brilliant legal mind just yet, Emma. I mean, not Emma, like the people of South Africa. When it was her husband's turn on the stand, Charles Johnson's testimony supported that of his wife's. They woke up after hearing a woman scream. While they were trying to determine the source and call for help, they heard the 4 gunshots, after which the screams stopped. Charles explained how easily sound travelled in the estate, and when Advocate Rue argued that the sound of a cricket bat striking a door will sound similar to that of gunshots, Johnson denied it, explaining that he often went to the gun range and so he is familiar with the sound of gunshots. He further went on to explain that we often hear jackal calls from a neighbouring small wildlife reserve, and it reminds us of the screams that we heard. It also reminds us how far and how clearly the sound travels in our area. When it is deathly quiet at 3 o'clock in the morning, I do believe that I heard a lady screaming and that it is possible for the sound to travel that far. Well, this isn't very hard to figure out. Go there at 3 o'clock in the morning and conduct a little experiment. Easy. Put a microphone or an impartial person in their bedroom, have someone go over and scream as loudly as possible from Oscar Pistorius' bathroom, and can we hear it or not? Not one of the state's witnesses broke down under Advocate Barry Rue's cross-examination, and not one of them changed their testimony despite Advocate Rue's insistence that they hadn't heard Reeva scream that night. When it was Dr. Johan Stipp's turn to testify, he explained to the court how he had been woken up by 3 gunshots. He had then gotten out of bed and made his way to the balcony, from where he was able to see that Oscar's bathroom light was on as well as the lights in the neighbouring house. That's when he heard someone screaming. The screams were very loud. They sounded extremely fearful. I would imagine those would be the type of screams you would hear if someone was in fear of his or her life. End quote. It was while he was trying to call the police that he heard the second series of bangs and heard a man calling for help 3 times. He then explained how he'd told security that something was going on at Oscar's house before he himself went over to help out in any way that he could. Despite testifying that he'd heard a woman scream after the first series of gunshots, the defense would, quite rightly, argue that he had in fact heard Oscar scream that night, and Dr. Stipp's testimony would be used to strengthen the defense's timeline of events. And when the forensic experts were called, the court were given detailed accounts of the evidence that had been collected and analysed during the course of the investigation. Captain Christian Magenia, the police's ballistic expert, explained that the toilet cubicle was small, just 1 metre by 1.4 metre, and Reeva would have had no way of avoiding being shot. Reeva had been standing with her right side facing the toilet when Oscar had started shooting. The first shot hit her right hip, causing her to fall down onto a wooden magazine rack that stood to the left of the toilet. Reeva had then placed her arms protectively over her head. The second shot missed her and hit the wall behind her, and shards from the broken tile then penetrated her back. The third shot hit her right arm, and the fourth shot went through her left hand and entered the right side of her skull, killing her instantly. Reeva then fell against the toilet, her right arm and head resting on top of the open toilet, resulting in blood trailing down the inside of the toilet. The blood pattern inside the toilet bowl is described as looking like the red and white stripes of a candy cane. Reeva had a black eye as a result of the bullet entering her skull, as well as a bruise on her left wrist. She also had a severe bruise on her right buttock, as well as 2 wine-coloured bruises on her spine. These bruises were most likely a result of Reeva falling onto to the magazine rack. Captain Mangenia told the court that Reeva had worn a white pair of men's Nike shorts and a black tank top to bed, and that the tank top had a hole in the right breast and had probably been caused when fragments of the third bullet left Reeva's arm. The pathologist, Professor Gert Seemann, testified that Reeva's bladder only had a few millimeters of urine in it, proving that she'd relieved herself shortly before she'd died. She also had eaten within 2 to 4 hours of her death, not 8 hours, like Oscar had claimed. When it was Oscar's turn to testify, Advocate Barry Rue tried to paint him as a traumatized individual who was now suffering from anxiety after he'd accidentally shot his girlfriend. And then he went on to tell the story of a disabled young man who'd suffered at the hands of criminals before, if not directly, then because members of his family had been robbed or hijacked in the past. As a result, Oscar was terrified at the thought that he might be the victim of a crime, especially because he is a double amputee who is vulnerable without his legs. Because of this, he also carried a handgun with him, which he kept in a canvas holster at his side and placed underneath the bed while he slept. Just a side note, this isn't a norm in South Africa since the process of getting a firearms license is extremely tedious, and this isn't Texas. I kind of thought like people would have easier access to guns in South Africa because it's scary. Like, all the security guards and stuff have guns there. Right? While standing in the dock, Oscar repeated his version of the night's events, sprinkling in extra details when prodded by Advocate Barry Rue, and famously breaking down when he explained how he found Reeva's body behind the door, resulting in the court having to be dismissed for the day because Oscar was too emotional. The next day, Oscar would described how he'd dragged Reeva's body out of the toilet cubicle, accounting for every piece of evidence found at the scene. It was obvious that he'd been well trained by Advocate Rue. But once Advocate Jerry Nell started his cross-examination, Oscar's story fell apart. Yeah, this is what I feel. This is what I not feared, but expected. It's a really good story, but the evidence is, and this Jerry guy, who seems to be a legend, is just going to be like, yeah, but this, and that, and this, and that, and this, and your story's a lie. And he's going to be like, yeah, I know. How did you know? Maybe, allegedly, let's see. Plenty of holes. P.S. I'd like to give a shout out to Paul Ringkamp for the chapter heading suggestion. Be welcome to skip it if you prefer. No, shout out, Paul!
We love you for it!
Irenaeus Spies is a criminal attorney that Sky News interviewed during the Oscar Pistorius trial, and he commented with the greatest respect on Oscar's performance during his testimony, which soon became, honestly, quite irritating. Although Oscar was clearly still deeply troubled by what happened that night, his testimony was obviously patched up in places to make it sound more believable, and it soon became obvious that Advocate Rue was trying to elicit the court's sympathy at every opportunity. Advocate Nell was having none of it, though, and when it was his turn to question Oscar, he showed Oscar, and in turn the court, a picture of Reeva's head wound, forcing Oscar to take responsibility for what he'd done.
I know you don't want to because you don't want to take responsibility, but it's time that you look at it.
Once again, Oscar broke down and said, I'll take responsibility, but I will not look at a picture where I am tormented by what I saw and felt that night.
I remember. I don't have to look at a picture. I was there.
Over and over, Advocate Nell would walk Oscar through his version of what had happened that night, forcing him to explain how he'd gotten out of the left side of the bed, walked on his stumps along the foot of the bed to the balcony, retrieved the fans, carried them inside the room, closed the balcony doors and the curtains before he heard something in the bathroom. Oscar claims that he'd slept on the left side of the bed that night because he suffered a shoulder injury, but now it added in an extra detail that hadn't been included in his bail application. Reeva had already been awake and had spoken to him saying, "Can you not sleep, my barber?" He claims that he told her no, then got himself out of bed and passed by her when he walked toward the balcony, using the bed for support since he was walking without his prostheses. He didn't specifically look at her or noticed whether the duvet had been drawn over her legs or not, although he claimed that the duvet had been on the bed, even though he also claims that it had been too dark to see. Yeah, but he could know it was on the bed because he was in the bed a second ago. He could have felt it. This is despite the fact that the balcony light had been on, and by his own admission, the curtains had only been partially closed to keep the bugs out. Once he was on the balcony, Reeva would have been behind him, so he wouldn't have been able to see her leave the room. Now, instead of just one fan, as stated in his bail application, there were two fans on the balcony that he needed to bring inside. Both were on and were blowing in his face, and that's why he didn't hear her get up while he moved the fans into the room. With both fans now in the room, Oscar closed the balcony doors and drew his blackout curtains, and then he must have crab-walked to the right until he came to a stop in front of the sound system that he kept in his bedroom because he still hadn't turned turned back toward the bed. He then magically noticed that a pair of Reeva's jeans were on the ground, despite the fact that he claims that the room was now pitch black because he would use the jeans to try and block out the blue LED light from the sound system. What's going on? If you've got an LED light on your sound system that annoys you, you would have dealt with that at some point. You're not going to be like, now is the time I do it. It's the middle of the night. You'd just be like, oh, okay. I'm going to unplug that before I go to bed. This is when he claims to have heard the noise in the bathroom, not while closing the curtains as he stated in his bail application. He then retrieved the gun without looking at or speaking to Reeva and made his way down the hallway toward the bathroom, from where he'd either whispered or spoken softly at Reeva to hide and call the police. Now below are a few photos of Oscar's bedroom as well as the floor plan. For those listening as a podcast, hello podcast listeners, leave a review. The photos show Oscar's bed. There are 4 pillows visible on the bed, with one of them resting up against the headboard. Okay, you'll be looking at the pictures on the screen. I'll be looking at them now. Okay, it is exactly as described. There's the floor plan as well, which looks like a little Sims house. Okay, cool. Gotcha. Okay, there's the fan. There's a fan that's come off the balcony. Somewhat how I imagined it in my mind. Less luxurious somehow. A grey duvet has been removed from the bed. Yes, it has. It's on the floor. A pair of Reeva's jeans is next to it, partially lying on top of the duvet. Yes, okay, I see all of this. Excellent. Next to the duvet is a silver tripod fan, and just behind the fan is a sliding door that leads to the balcony. The third fan can't be seen in the photo, but it was placed in the right-hand corner next to the balcony doors. The sliding door that leads to the balcony is open. The beige floor-length curtains are pulled back, and one of the bedroom lights are on, as indicated by a faint glow on one of the bedroom walls to the far left. Okay, yes, I see it all. Jolly good. On the left-hand side of the bed is a dark brown leather couch. On it is a black sports bag, and between the couch and the bed is a pair of shoes that belong to Reeva. Next to the left-hand side of the bed is the nightstand where the police had found the canvas holster and the ammunition. I get the feeling all of this is going to be really important, that we have this detailed in our mind. Let's find out why. Oscar claimed that he'd closed the balcony door and drew the curtains, yet in the photo the doors are still open and the curtains haven't been drawn. In Oscar's version of events, he'd run out onto the balcony to call for help. That's exactly what I was thinking. But according to the photos taken that morning, the fan would have been in his way, not to mention the fact that the second fan was too far from the white extension cord to have been plugged in that night, and its cord had still been neatly rolled up next to it. Oscar would tell the court that the police officers who inspected the scene that morning had tampered with the evidence. This is why his version of the events doesn't match the crime scene photos. Yeah, that's a bit of a stretch though, isn't it, mate? He could have walked around that fan though. I don't think the fan blocking the way is a particular big deal. He could have just shuffled around it, I suppose. Oscar told the court, based on the photographs, there were many things that had moved. There were cell phones in my bathroom that were moved. My firearm had moved. The cricket bat had moved in the bathroom. The music discs in my room had moved. The fan's cord had moved. The curtains had moved. And yes, the defense had a reason to use the tampering theory as a rebuttal. On the crime scene photos, one can see the 8 watches in a display case, but it was reported that 2 of those watches had been stolen after the crime scene photos were taken, giving the defense probable reason to explain any discrepancies between Oscar's version of events and the crime scene photos. Come on, police. This is more important. It's more important that you don't tamper with evidence than you nick a watch. Don't do that. It's really bad. It's much worse than just theft. It's like tampering with a crime scene and you're a police officer. Come on. Don't steal, for God's sake. But during the trial, it would come to light that some items had been moved during the investigation by the crime scene photographers who had to move and adjust some pieces of evidence to properly document the scene. For example, turning the cricket bat over to capture both sides of it and pulling CDs out from underneath Oscar's bed so that they could take photos of them before submitting them as evidence. Bro, what are you doing with CDs? It's like 2013. What are you doing with CDs? This rendered the defense's theory of tampering null and void and just served to highlight the differences between Oscar's story and the crime scene photos. Because, as Advocate Nell told Oscar, Mr. Pistorius, your version is a lie. Some elements of Oscar's story did match up with the evidence. He had fired 4 shots at the toilet door. He wasn't wearing his prostheses at the time. He'd broken down the toilet door with a cricket bat while he was wearing his prostheses, then dragged Reeva out of the toilet cubicle and placed her down on the bathroom floor. At one point, it called for assistance, picked Reeva up, and carried her downstairs, but there were also some obvious holes. The defense would call their own witnesses to back up Oscar's claims, but Advocate Nell cleverly dismantled their supposed evidence of Oscar's innocence and even got them to admit that in some instances, Oscar's version of the events isn't true. For example, when one of the experts, Roger Dixon, admitted that when the bathroom curtains were open and the balcony light was on, there was quite a lot of light in Oscar's bedroom at night, which contradicted Oscar's claims that he wouldn't have been able to see Reeva when he headed towards the balcony. The same witness also testified that the sound of a cricket bat hitting a wooden door sounded exactly like the sound of gunshots, before admitting that the sound clips he'd used to judge the difference had been altered because the sounds in the clip featuring the cricket bat were louder and more distinct than the sounds of the clip featuring the gunshots. And then there is the duvet. In the photo, the duvet had been tossed onto the floor in front of the silver fan. On one corner of it was Reeva's jeans. Oscar claims that he'd used the jeans to block out a blue light from his sound system, which would explain why he had his back turned to the bed when he supposedly heard the sound in the bathroom. But in his version, the duvet wasn't on the floor. And yet, when he'd carried Reeva to the hallway and turned towards his bedroom door that morning, her bloodied hair swayed to the side, leaving a clear trail of blood on the carpet and the duvet, proving that it had already been there before the police had arrived. Neither Oscar nor his so-called team of expert witnesses did his case any good, and in his closing argument, Advocate Nell would explain that it is our respectful submission that the accused was an appalling witness. The accused was demonstrably one of the worst witnesses ever encountered. The accused did not present as someone striving to give a truthful version, but rather as someone who was tailoring a version and was more concerned with the implications of his answers than the truth thereof. Wait, doesn't that describe every guilty person who's trying to spin a story in court so that they don't go to prison forever? That doesn't make him the demonstrably worst ever. It makes him like every person who's trying to get off. Quote continues, if the accused's elaborate false version is rejected, the court will have no option but to accept that the accused knew the deceased was in the toilet and fired 4 shots with the intention to kill her. Advocate Nell would continue to explain that even though the defense wanted to argue that Oscar had only fired his gun because he was convinced that the intruder was coming out of the bathroom, the placement of the bullet holes didn't support that theory. Quote, he wants the court to believe that he acted automatically, did not know what he was doing. When he heard the sound, he just fired. There are 4 shots, grouped shots, and the angle would indicate that they were all aimed at the toilet bowl. Oh my, that is like locking it in. Specifically aiming at that part of the room? The burglar's not going to break in and take a are they?
Everything is possible.
Throughout the trial, Advocate Nell would reiterate that Oscar's version of events couldn't reasonably be true because no reasonable person would react the way that Oscar claimed he had. But the defense would argue that you couldn't compare Oscar to that reasonable man from 1960 in his grey suit and grey shoes. You have to look at the person in the same position with the same abilities/disabilities. End quote. Advocate Rue went on to argue that over the course of his life, a disabled Oscar had developed a stronger startle response than most able-bodied people because of his increased vulnerability. To quote, you are vulnerable. You are anxious. You are trained as an athlete to react to sound. Take all those factors into account, and he stands now with his finger ready to fire if necessary, and he stands there and then. It comes down to that split second, that 1 minute or 20 seconds, where he was standing at the entrance to the bathroom, firearm pointed at the door. That is what this case is all about. If the Honourable Court were to find that the accused did not discharge the shots in a reflective response, then the alternative finding can only be that the accused intentionally discharged the shots in the belief that the intruder was or were coming out of the toilet to attack the accused and the deceased. End quote. See, that's quite a good argument. Now I'm beginning to see the brilliant legal mind of Advocate Rue. 6 months after Oscar's murder trial had concluded, Judge Marsepa read her ruling in court, picking apart the allegations of scene tampering, the witness statements, Oscar's testimony, and the evidence that had been presented at court to explain whether it had been, quote, proved beyond reasonable doubt that the accused had direct intention and premeditation to kill the deceased. It took her 2 days to read through her full judgment. It's 73 pages long. Good Lord. In it, she explains that the state had failed to prove that Oscar had planned or had a motive to kill Reeva. Okay. She also argues that despite the fact that Oscar had been an unimpressive witness, his version of events could reasonably be true, and that in criminal law, that is all that is required for an acquittal, as the onus to prove guilt of an accused beyond all reasonable doubt rests with the state throughout. As such, she found that Oscar Pistorius was not guilty of premeditated murder and is discharged. Instead, he's found guilty of culpable homicide. I mean, this is fair. I balance the probabilities, probably leaning towards my opinion being that he did know what he was doing, in my opinion. Balance the probabilities. But if I was on a jury, I'd be like, I'm sorry, there's reasonable doubt. There is definitely reasonable doubt. Well-established reasonable doubt. I'd say there's more than reasonable doubt. There's doubt. Oscar received a maximum sentence of 5 years for culpable homicide with a concurrent 3. I'm glad I mentioned all those murders as allegedly earlier, because that's different from culpable homicide. With a concurrent 3-year suspended prison sentence for reckless endangerment after he was found guilty of discharging a weapon in a public place. Oscar was released on parole after a year in prison, but the state had already contested Judge Marsipa's ruling and successfully filed for appeal twice, once in 2015 and once again in 2016. Now, these two appeals weren't as widely reported on as Oscar's murder trial, and they definitely weren't as easy to understand as Judge Marsipa's ruling. So I got a hold of the two judgments, and our resident lawyer, Liam Burt, awesome! Liam is another writer for this channel. He writes for this channel. I don't know why I said that twice.
What is he doing here?
And he's also studying for his doctorate in law in Wales. I know I should know that, Liam. I'm sorry. Aberystwyth! I know it! And he kindly offered to explain the two appeals to me. Liam's Legal Corner. P.S. I've been asked to put in the disclaimer stating that this section does not under any circumstances constitute legal advice. You're welcome. Now, the first appeal was held on the 3rd of November 2015, and 4 judges of the Supreme Court of Appeal would deliver their ruling by the 3rd of December 2015. In it, they explained that the state had appealed against Judge Marsipa's ruling on 2 grounds. 1, Oscar Pistorius had, in fact, intended to kill someone when he made the shots at the door. Their argument here rested on the fact that Oscar had admitted intent to shoot the door, but claimed he did not intend to kill who was ever behind it. Yeah, come on, mate. You shot 4 times. If you wanted to warn someone, you would aim top part of the door, splinter it off maybe? Something like that. But it was undeniably a virtually certain consequence from shooting the door that the person behind it would face death or serious injury, thus satisfying the intent requirement for murder. The second appeal rested on Oscar's claim of self-defense. He had argued that he had made a mistake, but that he had found an honest belief that he was acting in self-defense. The state argued that he had been notoriously unreliable during his murder trial, and that it was impossible to infer whether or not he was convinced that there had been an intruder that night. The Supreme Court of Appeal found that Oscar's actions that night did warrant a murder charge. They also dismissed his claims that he acted out of self-defense, and according to Liam, they were overly critical when they dismissed Judge Marsipa's ruling, claiming that it showed a lack of rationale reasoning. His exact words were, "South African law is metal." Liam notes that we don't have a clean-cut law for self-defense in South Africa, which he considered to be crazy and really bad for anyone claiming self-defense, no matter the circumstance. In order for Oscar's claim of acting in self-defense to be applicable, he had to have seen the intruder, witnessed that they were armed, and then determined that he was in danger before he could act in self-defense. Wait, that's an insanely high bar. Unlike in the UK, where Oscar just had to have been honestly certain that his life was in danger, which seems like a much more reasonable bar to pass, right? South African law is metal. Anyway, the Court of Appeal found that Oscar was guilty of murder, with the accused having had criminal intent in the form of oblique intent. And as a result, his sentence of 5 years for culpable homicide was changed to 6 years for murder. Oh, that doesn't seem that bad. Okay. The second appeal was judged on the 3rd of November 2017, and the state argued that Oscar's prison sentence for murder was too lenient. Yeah, 6 years for murder? If he's guilty of murder and they've decided that, 6 years is too lenient. The Court of Appeal would find that too much consideration had been given to Oscar because of his disability and his celebrity status. Further, what that bullshit? Obviously, celebrities should be treated different from other people. Come on. Furthermore, his goal wasn't to rehabilitate him, but to punish him for committing a murder. As Liam puts it, they wanted to make an example out of him. So, after the second appeal, it was decided that Oscar Pistorius should receive the minimum penalty for murder, which is 15 years, and he was sent to the Atteridgeville Correctional Center, which had been adapted to house disabled prisoners. Wait, he was given the minimum prison sentence for murder of 15 years, but then he was given 6 years originally? What? In March 2022, Oscar filed an application for parole, and on the 31st of March 2023, it was denied. Oh, so this is all very, very recent. The court ruled that Oscar hadn't yet served half of his sentence and that they'll reconsider his application next year. Note that this is the 10th anniversary of Reeva's death, and he had already spent 8 years out of a 15-year prison sentence in prison. So, by this time next year, it's entirely possible that Oscar Pistorius will be out on parole. Oscar versus the truth. I'd mentioned at the beginning of today's script that Reeva's story didn't have a satisfactory ending, and I now hope that you see why. There are just too many questions that have been left unanswered, and as I was compiling the script, I'd listed even more. Let's start off with the easy ones, shall we? Brothers Calvin and Thomas Mollett are two true crime enthusiasts who analyse the photos of the crime scene in their book Oscar versus the Truth. They point out several inconsistencies that were never discussed in court. One of the big questions that had been discussed in court but was never really answered was whether Reeva had used the toilet right before she was killed. She had. The autopsy dude had said that her bladder was empty. The pathologist, thank you, pathologist, autopsy dude, had testified that Reeva only had a few millimeters of urine in her body when she died, and yet they hadn't found any urine in the toilet. Did she flush the toilet right before she'd died? Calvin and Thomas conducted tests on a similar toilet to that of Oscar's and suggest that if Reeva had used the toilet, at least 20 seconds had to have passed between Reeva flushing the toilet and Oscar shooting her. Otherwise, a film of water would have still covered the inside of the toilet bowl, which wouldn't have allowed the blood to stick to the ceramic. This is good detective work, true crime dudes. After Oscar had dragged Reeva away, traces of water would still have leaked into the toilet bowl, creating the candy cane effect captured in the crime scene photographs. Then there is the amount of undigested food that had been found in her stomach, proving that she'd eaten within 2 to 4 hours of being shot. Advocate Rue had argued that Professor Seymon's estimation was just that, an estimation, and Professor Seymon had agreed that it was possible that more time had passed. The Molletts argue that it is possible that Reeva had been stressed in the time between eating dinner and her time of death, explaining why there was still food in her stomach 8 hours after she'd eaten it. As proof, they quote a medical handbook called Knight's Forensic Pathology when they say that any nervous or systemic shock or stress can slow or stop gastric motility and digestive juice secretion, meaning that our digestive functions are delayed when we suffer any type of shock or stress. The Molletts argue that either this is proof that all wasn't well between the couple that night, or Reeva hadn't gone to bed at 10 p.m. as Oscar had claimed, and the couple had still been awake at around 1 p.m. Thirdly, there is the tear in Reeva's black tank top. Captain Margenia had reasoned that this was the result of blowback from the exit wound on Reeva's arm, but based on the autopsy photos, I have to agree with the Molletts, who argue that it looks more like someone had grabbed her tank top and pulled, tearing a hole in it as a result. In my opinion, the edges look too frayed to be explained away as cuts from a bullet. I agree looking at it. I've got a photo of it here, it'll be on the screen, and podcast listeners, you'll just have to trust me. It does look like a tear, but I'm also not an expert, and I assume that there's an expert who looked at this and could probably explain it, right? And while we're on the subject of clothing, why was a pair of her jeans found on the ground outside the toilet window? Had she used it as a flag in order to show someone where she was, to help them find her once she started crying for help? Not to mention the fresh dents on the side of Oscar's bedroom door, which looked much like someone had struck the open door with a hard object. This is just being brought up now, or did I fall asleep halfway through this episode? Not because, just stop paying attention. It's very interesting. I'm not trying to say it's boring. It's really good. Most damningly are 2 bruises, shown on the screen now, which were found on Reeva's back, placed in the middle of her spine. On the autopsy photos, the 2 bruises are wine-coloured, 1 centimetre in width, and placed approximately 2 centimetres apart. Those are brutal bruises. They're very small, but they're so dark. What would have caused that? On the autopsy photos, a wine-coloured 1 centimetre width, 2 centimetres apart, Professor Seymon had described them as the result of a concentrated impact and say that they may have been caused when Reeva's body had collapsed onto a wooden magazine rack that stood next to the toilet. But even I can see that there's no way for those bruises to have been caused by the magazine rack in question, and after the image had been filtered, it's clear to see that the bruises have been caused by something moving down in a swiping motion with some force causing the skin to wrinkle on the bottom of the bruise. Okay. Yeah, I see it. I see it explained in the picture on screen. It's just You'll have to trust me, podcast listeners. The Millettes argue that this might have been caused by someone hitting her with a cricket bat, but I also think it's likely that she had been pushed and have fallen down on the side of a piece of furniture, resulting in the bruises. The magazine rack theory also doesn't explain the white fibers that have been found on one of those bruises, white fibers that didn't match the black tank top that she'd been wearing at the time. And then we have Oscar's phone. Though it wasn't brought up by the Millettes, it is discussed by Barry Bateman and Mandy Weiner in the book Behind the Door in a chapter titled The Secrets of the Missing Apple. Emma has gone so deep on the research for this one. I'm very impressed.
I amuse myself. I'm always thinking.
In it, they explain that when the police had collected their evidence that morning, they'd taken 5 phones into evidence. 2 iPhones, which belonged to Reeva, 2 old Blackberries that belonged to Oscar, and Oscar's work phone. Only later would they realize that Oscar had a second iPhone, his personal one, and that he never handed it over to them. When the police did finally take his phone into evidence, they were unable to access it, and Oscar claimed that he'd forgotten the passcode to the phone. So, mere weeks before the trial was to take place, an urgent request had to be sent to Apple's headquarters in the US for assistance in analyzing the phone. Wait, is this? I remember this. I definitely remember this happening. Or maybe this was another case where they had this and Apple were like, no, we can't do that. We can't get into the phones. That's the whole point. It's secure. But when Apple technicians eventually sat down to analyze the phone for them, they told the investigators that in the days following Reeva's death, Oscar had synchronized his iPhone with his brother's Mac and had deleted some of the WhatsApp and text messages on his phone before changing the password. As a result, the police only had the messages on Reeva's phone to work with while building the case against Oscar. But so what had been in these text messages that Oscar had felt the need to delete them before the police had a chance to seize his phone? All we know for sure is that a bruised Reeva had locked herself in the toilet cubicle with her cell phone. The neighbors had heard a woman scream for help. Reeva had used the toilet shortly before she'd died. She dropped her jeans outside the toilet window. This is there's so much stuff where it's like, if this had been brought up in court, I'd be like, well, there's my reasonable doubt evaporating pretty damn quickly. Oscar had shot her while he was standing on his stumps, put on his prostheses, and then used the cricket bat to batter a hole in the door so that he could unlock the door and reach Reeva, who'd already died at that point. I still think that the couple had an argument that night. I think that it had escalated and that it resulted in Oscar losing his cool with Reeva and shoving her. I think she'd fallen hard against one of the pieces of furniture in Oscar's bedroom, resulting in the bruises on her back and right buttock. I think Oscar had continued his tirade against her, and Reeva, feeling trapped with the bedroom door locked, escaped to the safety of the toilet cubicle. Once there, Oscar continued his tirade and probably banged his fist against the wooden door, scaring Reeva, who then started calling for help. Oscar, angry and now slightly panicked that she was going to ruin his precious public image by calling attention to their fight, tried his best to get her to shut up. But when she continued to call for help, he threatened her, telling her to stop, rattling at the door and scaring her further. I think it's then that he grabbed the pistol and shot at the door in an attempt to get Reeva to shut up and stop drawing attention to them. You know a great way to draw attention to you, Oscar? 4 loud gunshots. They're loud. People are going to come. What are you up to? Only then did he realize that he might have hit her, and when she didn't answer his panicked calls, when he'd broken the door down and saw what he'd done, only then did it really sink in. He panicked, and even while he tried to help her, to save her, his mind raced to come up with any possible explanation he could in order to explain away the fact that it simply lost its temper with her. I thought she was an intruder. But unfortunately, we'll never find out exactly what had happened in the house that night, and we'll be forever left to wonder why Oscar had killed Reeva. Yeah, I feel like that's given him some credit, to be honest there, Emma. Like, that he just was trying to shoot through the door to shut her up, rather than, shut her up permanently. I don't know. We just don't know, do we? We can't know what's in his mind. And that's, yeah. I mean, unless he has a deathbed confession or something. Okay, let's move on to the dismembered appendices. Number 1. Oscar's housekeeper used to live on the property and was there the night that Reeva had died. He was one of the first witnesses on the scene and would have been in a perfect position to hear exactly what had happened that night, and yet he refused to come forward and tell his side of the story. Can't you... Hey, wait, if there's a court case and they're like, you have to show up to court, right? They could just be like, you gotta come. Can you choose not to testify? Can you? I don't think so. At least I don't think so in the UK. They could be like, you got to come and testify. And you're like, okay, fine. It's like a subpoena or whatever. I know in America, they have the rule against, what's the one you plead? The Fifth Amendment? Fifth Amendment rights? That sounds right. Where you're like, I'm not going to incriminate myself. But that doesn't apply to incriminating other people, does it? Number 2. Captain Hilton Botha was removed from the investigative team after the bail hearing when it came to light that he was facing criminal charges of his own after he and 2 other police officers drunkenly shot at 7 unarmed passengers of a minibus taxi. He was eventually charged with 7 counts of attempted murder. Fucking hell. Dude, what are you up to? Number 3. In his bail application, Oscar reported that he had an annual income of about 5 million rand at the time of Reeva's death. In the days following the shooting, Oscar's sponsors dropped him like a hot potato. In order to pay for his legal fees, Oscar sold off all of his properties and investments. When he is finally released on parole, he'll be completely reliant on the kindness of his wealthy uncle unless he's able to do something with the business degree he obtained from the University of London while in prison. Number 4. Oscar's parents had divorced while he was in primary school. His mother worked full-time and struggled to care for her 3 children, while her ex-husband spent their money opening and failing at several businesses. Oscar's mother unexpectedly passed away when he was 15, and he had a rocky relationship with his father, who'd only started to show a renewed interest in his son once he started breaking world records. Father of the year right there. Number 5. Oscar's family had to keep his father from talking to the press after Oscar's bail hearing because Mr. Pistorius' comments came across as just a little bit racist. He blamed the ANC for the white Afrikaners' need to carry weapons to protect themselves from black South Africans and proudly touted his family's love of guns. Bro, it's not a good look for you or anybody. Number 6. While busy investigating Jackie Salibi, the then National Commissioner of the South African Police, on corruption charges, Advocate Jerry Nell was arrested on fraudulent criminal charges. Advocate Barry Rue had been his advocate during the consequent trial and had been able to prove that the charges against Nell had been falsified. That is some high-level corruption right there. Whereas I'm looking into the head of the Commissioner of Police and then they arrest you for crimes. That is just f***ed up. South Africa, stop it. Number 7. Technically, the state shouldn't have been able to have Oscar's sentence for culpable homicide overturned. According to Liam, there was a legal precedent that the culpable homicide charge had to be replaced with a different charge instead, and a new trial had to be held in order to determine Oscar's guilt. The Court of Appeal simply decided that it didn't apply to Oscar's case and ignored it. What the fuck? Again? There's a reason this process. What are you up to? Come on, South Africa. Number 8. The day before she had died, Reeva had sent money to her struggling parents so that they could renew their cable contract and watch her TV debut on the 5th season of Tropical Islands of Treasure. That is depressing. Ugh. Number 9. The first episode of the show aired just 2 days after Reeva's death. The show producers had decided that despite Reeva's murder, they were still going to continue airing the show, explaining in a press release that Reeva was an intelligent, beautiful, and amazing woman, and we feel it would be an injustice to keep that unknown from those who did not know her personally. Every episode that she is in, every frame that she so ably dominates, shines with her light, and her laughter echoes in every conversation, and we want to share these special memories with the rest of South Africa. And finally, I again want to thank Liam for his kind assistance on this script. Thank you, Liam. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, me. Thank you, Jen.
Well, here I am, safe and sound.
Oh, Jen, I never mentioned you. I'm sorry. Thank you for editing this show. You do a fantastic job. Thank you, everybody, for watching and listening and being here as well. I appreciate it. I appreciate it, especially if you leave me a review, if you're listening as a podcast, or a like or a subscribe, or most importantly, just come back next time. Tell a friend. And I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.